All right. Hi, everybody. Tracy Stuckrath with Thrive Meetings and Events and Eating at a Meeting. And today on the show, I have Brian Freedman. He is a wine, spirits, travel, and food writer. He's a restaurant consultant, host of corporate events, and a wine importer, if you can't tell from his background there. And he also hosts the twice weekly online video series called Day Drinking with Brian. And I will put the link in there because it's awesome. I was watching a couple of episodes and it's really, really good. So Brian, hi.
Hi, thanks for the nice words. I'm going to leave now. It's like George Costanza. I'm leaving on a high. There's nowhere to go from here.
Yeah, I actually forwarded a couple of your different stories to different people this morning. I'm like, oh my God, you have to watch him. So tequila and bourbon and wine and to be honest with you, I was a Bud Light. Well, in high school, I lived in Japan. Yeah, I lived in Japan, and we went out to the Japanese bars, but we didn't do that. But I was a Bud Light drinker for a long time, and then I got diagnosed with an allergy to yeast. So I joke that it was the natural light that I drank out of the keg in college.
It could do that, yes.
Totally. So I switched to vodka, and I've never been a big wine drinker at all, but I actually stopped drinking a year and a half ago. So
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So right. I'd love to learn about it because I think it's so interesting. And what I put in the promotion of this is how the wine and the spirits bring you to the country and the people, and that's really cool.
So, Tracy, for me, it's just never exclusively about the juice in my glass, right? I mean, that's fascinating and endlessly complex and interesting, or frankly, sometimes you just want a glass of wine and you go do that.
Right.
But it's, we were talking, it's the most amazing lens through which to see language, culture, geography, geological history. I mean, I remember several years ago, I was on a tasting trip to the Walla Walla Valley and Columbia Valley of Washington State. And in addition to tasting with winemakers and vineyard managers, for the first 2 days, they had a professor of geology with us in the van so that as we were driving, he could say, okay, look, you see the various color strata on the corner of that gorge right there. Well, that's because a glacier rolled through here 250 million years ago, and that's impacting the wine this way. So, it's just an incredible lens.
That is so cool. Yeah. And so my friend John, he said, Walla Walla, please shout out your favorite places.
Oh, there's so many. Honestly, I'm actually going to be doing a Walla Walla episode of Day Drinking with Brian coming up soon. And not just Walla Walla, but, that whole part of Washington State. I think there's just so much value to be had there. When you look at the pricing of so many other wine regions around the US and around the world, the QPR, the quality to price ratio of the stuff we're getting out of Washington is tremendous. I have some things behind me here, some bottles of Washington State Reds going back a decade and a half that are just now coming into their full maturity.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, keep an eye out because it's a part of the world that really excites me.
That's very cool. And just before we got on, you were starting to talk about, I look very red. I don't know why, but you were talking about Texas wines in the Texas Hill Country. So yeah. I have a whole huge group of meeting planners that I know from the Texas Hill Country area. So talk about that a little bit.
So look, I mean, it's widely discussed that there's wine made in all 48 of the continental states, right? Okay. And I'm sure someone up in Alaska and out in Hawaii, they're making wine too. But, you never know when you're going to find something that really is interesting and, maybe punches a bit above its perceived weight. I love the wines of Virginia, but that secret is out, right?
Right.
One of my favorite domestic sparkling wines comes from a producer called Gruet, which is from the internationally renowned winemaking mecca of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And, it's a French family and they're making champagne style sparklers for under $25 a bottle in New Mexico. So there's always something great. Texas is so exciting right now. We were talking about there's some great Southern French grape varieties that are doing brilliantly there. I love the sparklers. Some Spanish grape varieties really excel there. I've had some great Tempranillos. And because it's not a place that has that same sense of notoriety as some of the more famous regions, the Finger Lakes or Napa, Sonoma, whatever, it's a little bit more like that Wild West mentality where let's just plant it and see if it grows well, if we can vinify it into good wine. I mean, I've had great wine from the Snake River Valley of Idaho. But it kind of makes sense because it's not all that different from what's going on in Eastern Washington. So, keep an open mind when it comes to wines, to spirits. There's always something new to discover.
That's very cool. Now, there was a piece that you posted on your Instagram about Egypt. And that kind of really drew out your writing because you're a writer and the travel. And there was a quote on there and at the very, very end, because I don't remember where the other one was. But so I have this habit of talking to strangers. You and me both. And I love it. And my theory is that if you don't talk to a stranger, you can't make a new friend. Mm-hmm. But the quote at the end of that article was, especially in the little towns, we have a saying in Abasa. That when you're on a train and somebody asks where you're from, if you say the name of your town loud enough for everyone to hear, you've basically just invited the entire train to dinner. I love that. Yeah, that was, so I wrote that piece online for Travel and Leisure. And that came out of a trip that I went to Egypt in end of February, beginning of March. So the timing was impeccable. And we actually had to cut the trip a few days short because I always sign up with the State Department Safe Traveler Program. Oh, wait. Yeah. So, last year I was in the Bolivian Altiplano visiting quinoa farming villages where they're growing quinoa that goes into this fabulous French vodka called Fair Vodka. It's great. Although the CEO now lives in the Bay Area. So it's a small international world. So I always sign up for this program and I started getting emails from the U.S. State Department, as this mysterious illness was spreading. So we decided to cut our losses. We headed home a few days early, but we still had 8 or 9 days there. So what happened with that trip is, and it was a paradigm shifting, life-changing trip for me. There's a restaurant not far from where I grew up in suburban Philadelphia called Arpeggio, BYOB. Okay. And the chef is from Egypt, from this town outside of Cairo called Abasa. And he and his business partner, so Chef Hamdi and his business partner, Mary, they're both two spectacular people. I just adore them, which is good because when you're traveling with someone overseas for 8 or 9 days, you're either going to come away loving them or disdaining them. And I love them. Yeah. So, they're celebrating their 25th anniversary of their restaurant, which is a Mediterranean restaurant. And the idea was they wanted to go back to Hamdi's homeland and explore the food and really infuse their menu even more with this food. So we did Cairo, Abasa. We did a Nile cruise from Luxor to Aswan. It was great. It was such a warm, hospitable place. People went out of their way to be kind and welcoming. In a lot of ways, it reminded me of the big holiday dinners at my parents' house, where if you're not eating to the point of illness, you're not eating enough. And, you're in a lot of trouble. If you only have, enough for 4 people for breakfast, that's not okay. You have to have at least for half a dozen. So I was calling my parents every day and saying, Mom, I'm eating plenty. You'd love it here. That's awesome. So John just asked when the pandemic is quote unquote over, where do you first want to go and why? Anywhere not my house, John. So, one of the big perks of my job is getting to travel as much as I do. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I had trips scheduled that had to be canceled to Kyoto, Argentina,
southern Spain, and Israel. And so those 4 are very high on my list. But look, I am hyper aware that I am so ridiculously lucky with what I get to do to help pay our mortgage in this house. That, you know, I normally get to go to France and Italy 3-4 times a year each. So I'm having like, I've developed a slight shake here, and I think it's withdrawal symptoms from great pastries like that.
Yeah.
So honestly, though, John, if somebody invites me to do like a month-long blueberry wine tasting trip to southern New Jersey, I'm there because it's travel.
Okay, wait a minute. Blueberries are my favorite. There's a blueberry wine?
Sure, you can make wine out of any fruit, anything with sugar. You know, the yeast will eat it, ferment alcohol, produce alcohol. The question, though, Tracy, is it going to be good wine? And believe it or not, there's some great wines out there. There's a winery in the Columbia Valley, actually, in Washington State, that I'm doing some consulting for, and they make a spectacular huckleberry rosé.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You need to go check them out.
Yeah, Solvara Cellars. They're great. Right. Really interesting product.
He's calling you Jersey boy. And then Jennifer says Gruet is awesome. Served it at my wedding.
Love it, Jennifer. It's such a good wine. I mean, for under $25 a bottle, it's hard to do better than that. It's awesome.
That's so cool. Oops, that's your link to your thing, to your story. So what we met online via IAC.
Yeah, right here, actually. The same background, just different wine.
Exactly. Mine's changed a little bit. Painted my walls. And
nice color.
Thanks. You did a wine. Well, it was a whole conversation on food and beverage and what it's going to be post-COVID, whatever that means. But you did a really cool thing with the pairings of even breakfast. You know, what would you serve for breakfast and lunch and dinner with what was on the menu? But so I want to talk about that a little bit. But I also, and anybody, if you've got a menu that you want a pairing with, pop it up here somehow and we'll look at it. But what I liked too was that you mentioned, hey, vegan and the gluten-free, and I know you're Jewish, and so we had a really good conversation about Jewish wine or kosher wines before, you know, when we were getting prepped with this. So can you talk about a little bit about that? Because as I've told you, my podcast is all about creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences.
Yeah. And look, I mean, the truth is all of us know the reputation of wine. You know, when I was growing up, it was sort of the preserve of people of a certain economic stratum, right? And if you didn't know everything about wine, if you weren't born a native French speaker and could recite the entire 1855 classification of the left bank of Bordeaux front to back in French, preferably, thank you very much, then, you know, we're going to give you attitude. That wasn't necessarily the case, but that was the reputation. And, you know, then fast forward to, you know, the mid 20-teens, early 20-teens, and the phenomenon, which thankfully is dying a merciful death, of the hipster bartender that would judge you if, God help you, you ordered a vodka cranberry. That's not cool enough. You will have a pre-prohibition cocktail that'll take me 20 minutes to mix up, at which point you're not thirsty anymore. So there's, you know, the whole world of beverages has changed, and it's so much more inclusive. There's still a long way to go. There's a lot of work left to be done. There's no question about that. But I think things tend to be heading in the right direction right now. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that sense of inclusivity, it's all about making people feel welcome and safe, and not just safe in what they prefer or require, if it happens to be a health or religious issue, but also making people feel safe in voicing their opinions, right? I mean, I'm going to be honest with you, Tracy, so keep this between us, please.
Okay.
After a long day of tasting, you know, let's say I'm tasting a couple dozen wines for a column I'm working on or for an article, generally speaking, I kind of just want a cheap cold beer and a whiskey. Like, that's, you know, it's not about only consuming or respecting the things that are, perceived to be up here. It's about embracing the totality of it. And I think that's important. So we were talking about kosher wine.
Yep.
That's a great example.
Nancy, she's like, please, they've gotten better, but really not there yet.
Oh, Nancy, I respectfully disagree. So look.
And she's in Jersey.
Okay, so I'm going to be nice because Philadelphia, Jersey, we have to all get along here. I hope you're okay, actually, with the storm that came through yesterday. It was brutal here. So look, when it comes to kosher wine, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I'm working on a kosher wine piece as well. So here's the deal. Let's address what kosher wine is not first. Kosher wine is not Manischewitz. The stuff that they had there that I had after reading the Torah at my bar mitzvah, that's not wine. That's grape juice with a little dash of vodka in there masquerading as something that's appropriate for human consumption. So that's different. I will say, however, that those sweeter wines like Manischewitz or Mogen David, they are awesome in sangria. Believe it or not, they're very interesting in sangria. And I've actually had some cocktails with them where they'll take the place of a ruby port or a sweet vermouth, and it's a whole different thing. So,
oh wow,
yeah. So the laws governing the production of kosher wine, they're not all that different from the laws governing the production of organic wine, right? I mean, it's essentially a purity thing, right? So, and it's done in such a way that it's beneficial for the land too. So the land has to lay fallow. The vineyard has to lay fallow. I believe it's one every 7 or 8 years, but don't quote me on that. There's a whole list of additives that can be added to non-kosher wine that cannot be added to kosher wine. It has to be made under the supervision of a rabbinical authority, and it can only be handled by a Sabbath-observant Jew. The whole idea that, I see what Nancy just said. No, it's not just Herzog and that's it. There is a whole separate category of kosher wine called Mevushal, Mevushal. And this is wine that's a really tiny niche product. Okay. And so with regular kosher wine, I cannot taste the difference between kosher wine and non-kosher wine because there's no difference in how it's produced. I can't taste the presence of the Sabbath observant Jew that handled it, right? That would be weird.
Yes.
But Mevushal, these are wines that have been flash pasteurized. And there is a certain group of highly observant, very Orthodox Jews that they will not consume wine, even if it's kosher, that has been, even if the bottle has been handled and served by either a non-Jew or a non-Sabbath observant Jew. That's forbidden for them. So by flash pasteurizing the wine and getting that Mevushal stamp, that essentially means it can't be used for ritual purposes by anybody ostensibly, but whatever. And then they can drink it with impunity. For me, I have yet to taste a Mevushal wine where I say, yeah, I'd like to drink that again. I mean, you're boiling it, even though the technology has gotten better. But hey, I'm a Jew that eats bacon, so what do I know? But no, kosher wine is fabulous. There's no qualitative difference. There's some great Bordeaux producers out there that are making kosher wine. There's a long history in Bordeaux of kosher wine, Alsace of kosher wine. And I will say one more thing. The wines of Israel are so good and so exciting. We're talking about a country with a gigantic Mediterranean coastline, right?
Right.
So warm days, cool nights, grapes love growing there. There's a great winemaker named Jeff Morgan. Used to be one of the West Coast editors for Wine Spectator magazine. And now he makes wine in California and Israel. Yeah, and they're great. He makes them under the label Covenant, and they're awesome. And his, I don't know if all of his wines are kosher. They might be, but I would put his wines up there with the best on in either country. They're great. So definitely explore those wines.
And that's Covenant?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I will post that. Yes. And so, okay. So speaking of Israel, we were having that conversation about, I'm going to say the word
Kibbutz.
Kibbutz. Thanks.
Yes.
And tell that story about the kids with disabilities, right?
Yeah. So I was in 2012, I was in Israel on a wine tasting trip. And we which, by the way, I have such a hard time getting sympathy when I call home to my wife and kids saying, oh man, I had such a long day. They were like, really? You're somewhere wonderful tasting wine. So we're going to hang up on you now. So I was there tasting wine, and we visited this one producer called Tulip, like the flower. Okay. And it's this amazing place, delicious wines, love them. And it's founded on a kibbutz, and a kibbutz is essentially a collective farm where everybody lives together, and you're producing all of your food together, and it's this wonderful sort of it's like socialism done right, and everybody benefits, and it's really a beautiful thing. So it was founded post-World War II, post-Holocaust, for families that had survived the Holocaust and now had children who had some kind of developmental disabilities, right? So it's like it is objectively and inherently a good place, right? There's few of those places that's a good place. So they started making wine, and it's great wine. And the story goes that they were, this is now we're a couple generations past, and the people who lived there, a lot of these kids and these who had then grown up and they're still living there, and they were working at the winery. And the religious authorities came in and said, well, you're doing everything right in terms of, all the other kosher production, but we can't be sure who's touching the barrel with the wine in it, and therefore, or, handling the equipment or the grape juice, the grapes. So we can't give you kosher certification. And the people in charge at the kibbutz, at the winery, said, isn't that the opposite of what religion is supposed to be, what Judaism teaches, what, the vast majority of religions in the world teach? And they said, yeah, but those are the rules. And the people in charge at the winery, at the kibbutz, said, okay, let's see how the rest of Israel feels about this. And word got out that the authorities were perhaps following the letter of the law, if not the spirit behind it. And very quickly, they came to an agreement. And now they are making fabulous wine at Tulip that is certified kosher. And they're happy. The rabbis are happy. And this incredible place, this magical place, is still providing opportunity for people who maybe otherwise would have had a harder time finding meaningful work, things that fulfilled them emotionally and intellectually. They're doing that. And to me, that's, first of all, that's what religion should be about, right? And that's what wine should be about, because none of us get into the wine business because we have to. I mean, I'm sure there's some like 20th generation who's like, great grandparent was a count, and darn, I have to inherit this vineyard and I want to do anything else. I want to be an accountant. But most of us, we get into this business because we love it. And we love the stories that wine and spirits come with, and the connections that it fosters between other people. And I think that's, we could all use more of that these days.
And that's a good segue into just what food and beverage means. When you sit down at a table and you break bread, or you have a glass of wine or something to drink, that's what it does.
Hopefully.
Right, exactly. It helps bring people together. One of the things that, and I tagged my friend Heather in here because she's the first one that mentioned this to me, was, and I'm jumping ship here a little bit, the barrels and gluten. So when we're talking about different, because there are vegan wines and vegan spirits, and do you go to the website Barnivore?
I'm familiar with it, but no.
Okay, so Barnivore lists vegan and vegetarian wines.
Oh, that's great.
And spirits, all beers. But we have to think, and you and I told you I chatted with Camper English a couple of weeks ago.
Love
and
him.
He's doing the whole
genius.
I was blown away by him.
Yeah.
And what he's doing with food allergies and letting people know about liquor and spirits. But what I thought was fascinating was there's wheat in the glue of a barrel.
There can be. For people who have very severe celiac disease and wheat issues, do some digging. There are some barrels, some cooperages that will use a little bit of wheat-based glue when they're putting the heads on, the top and the bottom of the barrel.
Right.
And some of them, the sides of the staves, before those big hoops, those big metal hoops, slide on there, just to help keep them together. So, if it's something that is important to you or from a health standpoint, necessary for you to avoid that, certainly do some digging. But, again, there's no requirement that great wine has to be made in barrel. There's some fabulous wines that are made strictly in stainless steel. Okay. There's a whole thing happening now with these big concrete eggs. Are you familiar with this?
No.
Oh, it's fascing. I'm going to send you down the rabbit hole, Tracy.
Like the green egg you can grill on, or
no, we don't want a smoked wine. So there's smoked whiskey. Yes. Yeah, okay. So it's these huge concrete vessels that are shaped just like an egg. And they're either entirely concrete. Sometimes they're lined with epoxy, which I'd rather have that micro oxygenation that you get from just the concrete that's not lined with the epoxy.
Okay.
But one of the benefits of this is, and they hire liquid flow physicists to design these things because it keeps the wine in slow perpetual motion because of the angles in this egg. So you're increasing the amount of contact between the liquid and what they call the lees, the spent yeast cells, and some of the other solids in there. So you're building all kinds of other textural components into the wine, and other kinds of richness. And you're not dealing with anything wheat-based there. It's concrete.
That's so cool. Now, and we're coming up to 30 minutes, but I'm going to ask you a couple questions, more questions, if you have some time.
Sure.
I mean, when Nancy's a meeting planner like me, and John does team building, and who else do we have on here? Jennifer, planner as well. But when you're picking a wine at a hotel, how do you, or at a convention center, and you want to provide, or even picking your bar menu, and especially with COVID now, everybody, you can't leave the bottle on the table, and how is that? But how do you pick a wine or a bar package that would be inclusive to kosher and vegan and a variety of other things? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, there is. And it's funny, Tracy, because I've had to start rethinking the consulting part of what I do, because I build wine lists and bar programs for restaurants and hotel clients.
Right.
And it's different now, right? Because you don't have that luxury of being able to look at that beautiful back bar necessarily, or have things brought to your table in the same quantities that they once were. So I think the way to make it work from an inclusivity standpoint, as well as whatever the new normal is post-COVID, or once we're able to sort of wrap our arms around it, whatever that looks like.
Right.
I think that in building programs and in selecting these wines and these spirits, it's important just to create those programs with that sense of inclusivity built in. So as opposed to saying, I'm going to have my criteria as X, Y, and Z, and then, I'll throw a vegan wine in there, or a kosher wine, or a whatever, a gluten-free wine. I think that has to be part of the calculation in just conceiving it before even tasting the wines.
Right.
And that's something that I think is a big wake-up call for those of us in the industry who are tasked with building those programs. And then that way, it's creating that sense of safety and welcome without people having to feel like, all right, I have to ask and get into that conversation. Mm-hmm. Is it vegan? Is it gluten-free? Where just to send that message that it's built into the program. And I'm not saying that, it's often not economically feasible in order to do a program that's entirely vegan or gluten-free or kosher, whatever. Mm-hmm. but I think there needs to be a greater consideration of that while we're building them. I will say one thing. If I can get on a soapbox for a second here, I know we're running long, but this is the problem, Tracy. For a long time, I was paid by the word, so I'll just go. There's a movement now, not a movement, but it's getting a lot of buzz. Something called, quote, clean wine. Okay. And I want to caution people about this. So, there's the whole natural wine movement, which, people talk about. You're not adding yeast, you're not adding additional sulfites and, all this other stuff. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about that, but that's one thing. Okay. But I want to warn people about the clean wine trend right now, because it's nothing but a cynical marketing ploy. And a lot of the language being used for so-called clean wine, and generally speaking, a lot of them, a lot of celebrities are coming out with their wine line and saying it's a clean wine, and there's like total opacity in terms of where the fruit's coming from, how it's being made. And the indication is, if our wine is clean, then that's a binary system, right? Then wine that's not that must, by definition, be dirty, right? Because that's the opposite. So don't fall victim to that. It's a false dichotomy. Just know what's in your wine. I mean, for all of us, the less stuff that's in it, the better, right? Like, the fewer chemicals on the vineyard, the fewer additives in the winery, the better. But the truth is, sometimes wine has to be adjusted in the winery. I was talking to a great winemaker in the Santa Lucia Highlands yesterday in Monterey County, California. He was saying, his job is to maximize the chance of success and minimize the chance of failure. So, there are certain things that you can do in the winery, but, that doesn't include adding, Splenda or something ridiculous, right? Or like all kinds of preservatives. That's obviously garbage. Bulk produced wine nobody feels good drinking that. But that false narrative that there's clean wine and there's dirty wine, I would just warn people about that.
Okay, no, that's really good. I mean, because there is a whole magazine called Clean Eating.
Oh, God. I like dirty eating, Tracy.
Dirty eating, yeah. We don't need to wash our vegetables with soap and with Dawn and water, bring them home from the grocery store.
Right. Well, and then there's also that interesting, there's so many compelling studies, right, where kids who grow up on farms, who are, in the dirt, have stronger immune systems. That matters. Yep.
Well, yeah, and there's a study on food allergies that as you go more rural out, there's fewer kids with fewer allergies than there are in suburbia, because you've got air filters and all of this stuff, but they're out there, picking up worms and rolling in the cows' pastures, So yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Our daughter, our oldest daughter, who's 9 now, going on 30. She's in the other room right now.
She's not Miss Olivia, right?
No. Miss Olivia always goes by Miss Olivia or Ms. O. Miss Olivia is 6, and Sophie is 9. And Sophie was born with a nut allergy. And, when we found out, like everyone does during, routine tests. And the doctor, the allergist, said, okay, peanuts are verboten. Just keep them away from her system. We don't want any issues. And then like a year and a half later, all the studies came out and said, ooh, actually the right thing to do before their immune system is fully developed as toddlers is expose them to peanuts so they won't have an allergy. And we missed that by like 18 months. So yeah, exposure to, don't wash your vegetables with palm olive or something. It's terrible.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Okay. And a lot of things that I've been seeing online are, people are sending food to their employees or to clients, but also alcohol, and bars are, getting permission to send drinks to go. And so and there was a couple of conversations in some of these Facebook groups from planners saying, where are you getting the wine from? So how can a planner do that the best? Because some people are like, can you actually ship it? And who can ship it?
It depends on your state. It is, the U.S. is essentially 50 independent nation states, each of which has its own unique and often highly contradictory laws when it comes to the shipping of alcohol. Yes. I import wine from this fantastic producer in the Western Cape of South Africa called Holden Mans. And it was not too hard to get licensed federally by the USTTB to import wine. But then to get licensed to import wine from the dock into the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania by our Liquor Control Board took, like a year and thousands of dollars. I don't know if you can see the silver hairs here, but that's almost entirely a result of the paperwork that I had to deal with getting licensed in Pennsylvania. So find out what you can do in your own individual state, because they're all different. And especially in the age of COVID, some states allowed takeout cocktails or takeout wine 6, 7, 8 weeks ago, whereas other ones just came on board recently. So you have to be careful. You don't want to run afoul of the law. It can be very expensive. And yes, Jennifer, amen. Alcohol shipping in the U.S. equals ridiculous. There are stronger words I would use, but again, Miss Olivia is listening in, as is Sophie. So let's just stick with ridiculous. It's very frustrating.
Well, and even just getting a liquor license to have it at an offsite venue in some cities and states is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I have been doing several virtual tastings for corporate clients every month. Okay. And, I work with various wineries depending upon what style of wine they want. I'll say, okay, let's work with this winery in Napa, this one in Oregon. And usually there's 8 to 10 different states that are represented among the guests. So then I have to work with the winery to figure out, okay, where are you licensed to ship? And if you're not, let's identify third-party shippers to get the wines easily to those clients. So we've always been able to. But it's tricky. It takes some legwork.
It really kind of does. Jennifer said, much stronger, but going family friendly.
For the language, for ridiculousness of shipping. Yes,
exactly. John said up here earlier, please contact Victor and Deb before your episode, wine expert and event coordinator of Wine Center. Okay, John, I want to know where that is so we can do that. Because we're now at 37 minutes, so which is good because I could learn about all this all the time. But what can planners do? I mean, where can they find you? I've already tagged your Instagram page, and how can they work with you to do these pairings that you're talking about, or these corporate events?
Absolutely, yeah. It's funny because in what we've taken to fondly referring to as the before times, I would host events for corporate clients around the country. And I would, go to St. Louis or Cleveland or San Francisco, whatever it might have been, and host these wine or spirit or beer focused dinners for anywhere between 20 and 200 people. And obviously that we can't do that right now.
Right.
So many of my corporate clients, both existing and new ones, we've gone virtual. And, for anywhere between 15 and 25 or 30 guests, we'll host these Zoom or WebEx, whatever platform they prefer to use, these tastings. And it's great because, we work with a winery. Probably foolishly, I'm not seeing any kickbacks from the winery, but I just want to keep it as clean as possible. The winery, the client ships me the list of guests. I send that to the winery. I give the winery the client's credit card number, the corporate client's credit card number. They pay for the wines. The winery blasts out the wines across the country, and we do anywhere between 60 and 90 minutes virtual tasting. And it's just a nice way to engage clients, to engage colleagues in a manner that's conducive to networking, because who doesn't network after 3 or 4 glasses of wine?
Right.
But also, some of my financial services clients, for example, it's not talking about your retirement portfolio or anything like that. It's saying, look, we can't take you to dinner, but we can do this, which is the next best thing. And I've partnered with chocolatiers to do custom chocolate pairings with the wine. You reach out to me on Instagram. It's at Freedman Reports. I have a website, briandfreedman.com, but these days I feel like everybody contacts me through Instagram, right? Like the Instagram and LinkedIn.
Well, and on Instagram, and I think, I don't know if they're on Facebook or not, but your videos, your daily drinking with Brian are on Instagram, and they're hysterical. So nice. I just reposted. Oh, that was the Facebook one.
So they're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We're starting a YouTube channel, so they're everywhere.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And do you have what is your favorite food and your favorite beverage?
Oh, so all right.
And I feel like what you wrote in here. So do you want me to remind you what you said?
So I think I know what I said. Let me see how good my memory is. All right. Tell me if I'm right. This is going to be like 20 questions. All right. So first of all, for me, I grew up on Friday nights. Was that in there? My mom's spaghetti and meatballs?
That was part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So every Friday night growing up, my mother would do a big spaghetti and meatball dinner. And I've been tasting wine with my dad since I'm 6. He's been a collector since before I was born. I grew up with this much wine in my glass, or whatever the smallest, a nanometer. I don't know if that's volume or not, but let's say a nanometer of wine. And I was expected to taste with him in the living room. And then my mom is a great, great cook. I learned everything about cooking from her. And, we then go into the kitchen. She would say what she's making for dinner, and my dad and I would pick out a wine from the basement and so on and so forth. So Friday night spaghetti and meatballs with big Napa Cabernet, and occasionally Left Bank Bordeaux. I also love, so that's like my Proustian answer, right? Like that's my Madeleine.
Okay.
I do have a soft spot the first Monday of the month when possible, when I'm not traveling, which is never right now.
Right.
I love fried chicken and champagne. I think that is one of the all-time great combinations.
So you're going to Kentucky Fried Chicken or Popeyes?
No, I have a 48-hour process where there's like there's a 36-hour buttermilk soak with all kinds of secret spices. I have an old, well-loved cast iron skillet. I'm frying it in 2 separate segments with like a 3 or 4 hour gap in the middle, so then that tightens up the crust. And I do like collard greens with ham hocks in there. I do mac and cheese. We do the whole thing. And champagne with that is spectacular.
Okay, so I need to, and I'm going to tag her later, but I need to hook you up with Rebecca Lang.
Okay.
She is a chef out of Athens, Georgia, and she's got a whole cookbook on fried chicken.
Oh my God, I can't wait to talk to her. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to hook the two of you up because that would be a fun conversation.
Have you ever had fried chicken and champagne?
Well, I can't have fried chicken because I'm gluten-free.
Oh no. Okay. Have you had you can do fried chicken with rice flour.
I could do that. Yep.
Which is great. Really nice and crackling crust with that.
Really? Okay.
Oh yeah.
All right. Jennifer just asked us another thing. If you don't have Deep Run Roots by Vivian Howard. Oh, Vivian's great. She's right down the street from me in North Carolina.
Okay. Familiar with Deep Run Roots. I need to pick that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's just closed one of her restaurants, but she's really, really good too. But yeah, I will hook you up with Rebecca Lang.
Please.
Sure. Yeah.
And any fan of fried chicken and champagne is a friend of mine. It's like, oof, I get a chill thinking about it.
And Jennifer, I forgot. Jennifer's in Raleigh. Yeah. So she's right down the street from me too. So hi, I'll come see you soon, Jen.
With champagne and rice flour fried chicken.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So any parting words for all these drinkers or non-drinkers or whatever they are?
Yeah, I would say, we will at some point, some semblance of normal will come back, whatever that looks like, right? I mean, after September 11th, normal returned. It was different,
right?
But it became our new normal. So it's so important that all of us continue to support people in the restaurant business, in the beverage business, because the hit that those industries have taken has been unprecedented. So I think once things do start coming back, it's going to be a long process. There's going to be some really frightening and horrific attrition. But I think whatever any of us can do from our positions in the industry, in the business, I think is important. And, look, the more inclusive we can make our part of the job, whether it's me creating beverage programs that give people a sense of safety and a feeling of inclusivity, and revivifying that sense of joy that great beverages and food can do. And I think from a meeting planning standpoint, it's just, keeping in mind that people are going to be going back. My wife and I were just talking this morning. We're all going to have a little bit of some version of PTSD from this, right? The kids certainly will. The adults will as well. Yeah. And it's going to be odd to be going out again and to be able to fully let your guard down at a restaurant, at a meeting, at an event. So the more we can do to sand down any rough edges we can find, that would really help people sort of sink their teeth back into that experience, or dip those toes back into those waters, I think it'll benefit all of us in both the short term and in the long term.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and food and beverage helps bring that together, and doing that with the food and beverage we serve can actually help make people feel more comfortable. Absolutely. I mean, after a glass or two of wine, right, or a cocktail, I mean, that's when it loosens the tongue, and it gets people sort of conversing and connecting in ways that maybe they haven't. So, and the ritual of it is important too, right? I mean, my wife and I have taken to doing happy hour several times during the week, and even if it's something as simple as a gin and tonic at 5:30 when we're both done work for the day, that ritual, that sort of it's the end of the day. Our kids have taken to occasionally making their non-alcoholic ones. So they use things like coconut milk and cinnamon and seltzer water, and they get involved in it too. And there's so much emotional benefit to breaking bread and sharing something to drink with people, whether it's something fancy or not fancy, fermented or not fermented. That ritual and that connection, that means the world, especially now. And that's awesome that you said that, because my mom does the same thing. It's 5 o'clock. We're going out on the patio and we're going to have our bourbon or gin or whatever they have. And she's like, Tracy, what do you want to have? But we went to Scotland a couple of years ago and to see my niece in the Fringe Festival. And she's like, I have 2 questions. Will they have non-sparkling water? Because I don't like sparkling water. And 2, we have to have a drink at 5 o'clock. So she was like, on vacation, she's going to make sure that she's having her happy hour and her drink to maintain that ritual that she has, which is good. Yeah. In Scotland, that's not hard. No. I mean, there's a couple of whiskeys there. Yes. She had a grand time. So it was good. Great. It's great. There's so much great Scotch whiskey out there. That's, that to me, though, that's the end of the night for me, right? It's like, bourbon before, Scotch afterwards. That's just my craziness, though. That's okay. Well, and he's got some great videos on all of that on Instagram. So go check those out. Oh, who, me or your? You do. Me. Yeah. Oh, you do. Yeah. So John Chen, I'm doing my virtual thing. He likes doing virtual hugs and pointing. And so, yeah, Brian, you. Me. You, yes. So everybody check him out. Thank you so much. Joseph put on here, he goes, you are both amazing and always enjoy listening. Thanks for keeping us in the know. So thank you for helping me keep them in the know, Brian. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. This was like a great Wednesday afternoon. Well, thank you. Likewise. And I'm getting a storm now, so we're going to get some more rain, but I know. Fingers crossed, no flooding. It's no fun. So thanks everybody for listening to Eating at a Meeting. We're with Brian Freedman. And all of his contact information is in the feed. And to reach out to him on some wine and spirits programs, that'd be great. But every meal and every drink matters, because every guest matters. So thank you very much. See you next time. Thank you, Tracy. Stay safe out there. Thanks, Brian.